That's not bad.
I believe already.
Am I at an angle?
You are at an angle. That would be your webcam. Ah, we're live. After much difficulty. I feel like we should tell people that we've done a couple of other podcasts, but we've had some audio difficulty, so we're going to pick this up now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're at a 50% success
And,
rate.
and I will put that blame 100% on me. Thomas is not the one who is inept with the technology. It is totally me. So,
Or I would
that being
just
said,
say this wasn't a test of my ability. I wouldn't say that it's there.
I
Just
will
that
say you do have crappy internet though, so
it's
better
better.
now.
Oh my god! So here, I took a picture of it yesterday, so I remember because I think you're gonna find it hilarious
Oh
that
Lord.
my download speed was 46.4 megabits per second, and my upload speed is 38 megabits per second. There,
Yeah, you need
there
a new
was a
motherboard.
I need a new motherboard. There was a point where my upload speed was actually higher than my download speed, which I thought was hilarious. I
Oh
should
my
just rent out upload to my neighbors. If you guys need to put documents online, come on by. Do you need to download them? Go home.
Oh Lord.
No, everybody else's Wi-Fi in my house works great. Just the Wi-Fi on my desktop is terrible.
That would be your motherboard.
Yeah, my phone is 10 times faster. So, anyway,
So today we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, Thomas's favorite subject ever.
oh, and look, I wore a shirt, a relevant shirt.
Oh my gosh.
So, let's see. I'm not good with reverses. So
Awesome.
this is Games Masters MicroCon 6, which was a store. I'm going to say was because I'm pretty sure they went out of business. When I worked there, they were going through Chapter 11. And then I know they went through bankruptcy at least one more time. So that was 20 years ago. I'm going to go ahead and assume they're gone.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely.
It's hard. It's a hard business to be in. But I went to this convention and helped work at it. I'm not going to say I helped run it because I ran stuff at the convention although everybody that works at a convention runs stuff from wherever the resource hub is out to whoever needs it, right? I think we've all ran bottles of water to rooms or whatever when working at conferences. So I ran at that conference. I didn't run the conference. And that got me introduced to kind of the idea of using gamification elements to help assist in other things, right? So there were, games around registration, so to speak, and there was different contests about. I mean, and this was in the '90s, so it's not like we had, a tweet per minute contest or whatever. But there were those kinds of things.
Are you making fun of me?
You would I make fun of you?
Oh,
No.
yeah, in a heartbeat. Anyway,
Well,
gamification.
and that's
Yeah, come on.
that would be a whole other interesting podcast too to talk about ways that you can gamify conference stuff without it just being numbers, without it being stuff like that, right? Like how do you measure engagement and an increase in value for a conference experience isn't just the tweets, but what's in them and then how are they responded to. So it's a much harder metric. So I think a lot of people look at that and it's not like they're blind to the fact that there's a deeper thing there. They look at it and they realize what it would take to actually, judge that and manage that. And they're like, yeah, cool. Tweets per minute it is. So even if I laugh about it, it's not because I'm not judging everybody all the time.
For reference, I was in charge of a conference. I wouldn't say I was in charge of. I was part of it, and
You ran
we
out
did a
of
tweet contest. So he is making fun of me, but that's okay. And for those exact reasons, actually, because if you have to have those numbers by the end of the conference to give something away, there isn't a good way to truly judge the content. Which
No, it has
you
to
bring
be
up a valid point. Yeah.
It has to be somebody's like entire job devoted to
Mhm.
that, to increasing your own engagement with that experience as a conference. I was going to say TO from the gaming world, tournament organizer, but as a conference organizer, as a conference team, to be able to come out in especially if it's a 1 day conference, right? To come out at the end of that day and say, here's our winner, or to be willing to say it's going to take us a week and then we're going to announce the winner and send it to you anyway. And if the conference is in person, that people aren't going to like that. But if the conference is already virtual, you're getting your gift mailed to you. I don't know. That might be a thing. But we should talk about that some other time.
Yeah, no, we're not talking about conferences right now. We're talking about gamification.
Yeah. And so I like the idea of gamifying things. And I saw that there was a flood of people putting games in courses, in experiences. And I said to myself, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to put games in courses. I want to use the things that make games successful to also make courses successful.
Oh, thank you for saying that, because in my experience, a lot of gamification is, if they get the right answer, then, they get a badge. That's not really motivating. It motivates some students, but not all. Like, you need to have a deeper purpose for it. So,
yeah, and so two sides of that, right? Like, as far as gamify the course and gamify the grades, and now they're competing for the grade that they want against themselves normally, hopefully, right? You're not putting teams against each other in some sort of
I've seen it.
I've volunteer
seen that
as
too.
tribute setup. Yeah, I think we've seen it.
Which also has pluses and minuses, because there is research tied to peer pressure. Sadly, I don't think it's the best way to do it, but in a capitalist society, it might not be a bad way to go.
As a pre-stated master equivocator, let me go ahead and argue with myself and say that if you're trying to create a situation where people are playing for a pot of imaginary money as a team of entrepreneurs or inventors as part of a design class or whatever, then yes, by all means, ignore me. Ignore the me from 2 minutes ago and listen to me now. And that's how I always get argued with and listened to, right? Because I'm a master equivocator. So the idea of putting a worksheet in front of somebody is something that we've all experienced as educators. And then what is that worksheet actually for? And I think it's a very, very valuable tool that maybe gets vilified as part of a process that isn't utilized in too many different ways. And I think each educator maybe builds their own, right? They get stuff that they have to use, and then they put stuff together on their own, or they reject the idea of a worksheet and build something that's clunkier but actually serves the same purpose as worksheets in their mind, as a guide to learning, right? Is a worksheet a guide to the lecture that they're receiving it in? Is it a guide to a learning process for an assessment? Is it a tool to be used by somebody that understands something already?
So right now, that the whole worksheet idea has a horrible negative stigma attached to it, especially coming out of the COVID pandemic, because everybody uploaded their worksheets online and that was it. And they were just like, work's done. And I think this is really a valuable topic to talk about, because I love the idea where I know you're about to go with this, because it attaches creativity to that worksheet rather than it just being, and in certain subjects, I think maybe they do have a purpose. In math, you have to practice. Whether you want to agree with that or not, you're not going to do it once and remember it forever. Those worksheets do have value. Now, are they the best way to go about it? That's debatable. But when you need practice, they're not always bad. That shouldn't be your go-to, right? But it's not bad.
Yesterday on teacher Twitter, I love calling it teacher Twitter.
That's what it is.
The idea came up that we're testing people for a certain kind of knowledge and a certain kind of ability, and the people that don't excel at rote memorization and then regurgitating that suffer because of it. But also the other side of it is people like me, where I found it extremely easy to memorize facts and dates and stuff for a test that was only 2 weeks away. But I didn't have any deeper understanding of the processes or anything that I would have needed for later on. And so somebody like me can get A's in Algebra 1 and geometry, and eventually Algebra 2, and then go into college and try to take trigonometry and physics and utterly fail out, because it wasn't about oh, did you memorize these things for 2 weeks? It was about these fundamental ideas that I didn't have. And so both sides of the equation kind of suffer when you focus on just one kind of assessment. So that idea led to what you were alluding to a minute ago, with this idea that if you don't like worksheets, then why don't you help the students create their own guided worksheets to their own learning, and make it part of a group assignment if you want. And I started thinking about the ways worksheets are presented, right? So you've got a page, you've got 2 pages, you've got 3 pages, and you're trying to get main ideas across. You're trying to maybe guide them through some sort of lecture that you're going to be giving. So you've got, 45 minutes to talk to them about bones. And so now you're looking at, okay, I've got 2 pages of white space. What do I give them to support the lecture I'm about to give them on bones, right? Like, how do you divide up bones? Are there major areas of bones? Do I divide them up by, function and size or flavor? Like, how do you divide up the human bones? Not flavor. I'm just making sure y'all were awake. And so the idea started coming to me, well, there's all these different approaches, right? Like, every single teacher has all these different approaches. Well, like, I know they're going to need to do repetition of terms. They're going to need to go over these things. They're going to look at pictures. They're going to need to label pictures. So there's going to be images that are labeled and unlabeled, and some of them that have predetermined spots that need to be labeled for various reasons, diagrams and everything that we see in all of the publisher content, with different pieces of it stripped away for the students to fill in as guides to their learning. And so that connected to my idea of this, the placeholder for learning, which I hope I've adequately explained, but I'd like to keep explaining it, that you're not going to be able to get it all into their heads in that 45 minutes, right? You can't teach them every bone in 45 minutes. So you want to create a placeholder for learning, so that when they either get to their next point of study or to their point of assessment, there's a logical path in their mind to go back from that to the study place, to the worksheet material, to the original lecture. So you say,
that's a conference presentation right there.
And my wife is going to be embarrassed because I don't know anything about bones, and I chose to use bones in this example.
Oh no.
Yeah. Because I didn't build a guided worksheet for my own study of bones, and I got a D in biology. Yeah. And so if you were trying to teach this to me, God forbid, or hopefully a student, and you let them pick, 3 study items out of a choice of 5, and then build their own guided worksheet. So they're going to say, well, look, I know I need to go over. They're going to say, I need to go over the terms. I need to know the names, because the professor has stated that we're going to need to know the Latin names and the names of all of the bones in this area that we're studying. Let's say
there's a lot of bones.
Yeah, let's say just the skull. And so you're breaking down the bones in the skull, and you're making your own, flashcards, or you're utilizing publisher content or some kind of digital content to reinforce this. And then the idea of the worksheet would also have a time length attached to it. So the students would be choosing, 25 minutes of guided study through terminology and 30 minutes of repetition of pictures of the different layers, so that I can see which bones are connected inside of the skull in different ways, so that the knowledge begins to build onto itself. And then I would do another reinforcement activity of like 5 minutes of the terminology. And then you get into the other, main one that you've chosen out of the 3. And let's say now you're building your own image map. So now the students have gone from learning the terminology, repeating the terminology, looking through different layered images of all of the bones and the things that they're connected to. And now they've gone into the creation step themselves at the end of it. So they've guided this whole process from the beginning. And then if you want to go hog wild with it, you bring them back into class, have them trade worksheets with each other, have them give the students a rubric of what it means to build these learning activities for each other, assess people's worksheets across group lines, use them again for study, and then assess that process. And then I dare you to tell me students get a lower grade than they would have just being given the material and sent off on their own.
There were 3 things in there that you hit on that are not only near and dear to my heart, but they're also proven in the research at this point. Peer-to-peer interaction. And especially if you're doing this online, then it becomes essential. I mean, you have to have that peer-to-peer interaction on the online space. The creativity bent of it is really surging right now. And it also opens up student choice and student expression, which I love. And my heart of hearts is project-based learning. So anytime you talk about an assessment with a rubric as a base, I get very excited because it takes the subjectivity out of grading, and it really helps the student focus on the content that you need them to master. And what you're describing right now isn't new in the K through 12 classroom. It's basically teach the teacher. You hand over all of the material and you give them a scaffold of, okay, here's what I need to know about the plates in the brain. And then you have your rubric that shows exactly, which ones that make sure that they highlight all of this information. And then you turn it over to them and let them use their own creativity and their own expression to teach it back to you. And then you assess whether or not they hit all the points. And that is such a better way of teaching than just putting something in front of a kid and say, okay, label this. Because now they have to synthesize something and they are actually making those connections so that you have a deeper level of learning, and you have that student individual expression, or however they want to whatever modality they want to use to express it out to their classmates. So they're more likely to remember it. So this model actually works really well.
I didn't make it up. I learned it from listening to successful science teachers like my wife and other colleagues, and going to conferences and listening to people and looking at I'm going to say the data, but the information that they presented and the data that they were able to gather and share, which is, it's not always large. So why do you think people don't do it?
Why do you think people won't use it?
It's a lot of work.
Is it? Yeah. I mean, it's a shift of the focus. I mean, yes, it's easy to pull out a worksheet that you've used every year and slap that down in front of your student. But if you design the lesson, it's just as easy to slap down that lesson every year, right? So put the work in is my that's my plea. Like, let's put the work in.
Yeah. And it's something that is, I guess it's hard to incorporate into metrics for success from an administrative level to say
no, it's not. No.
To say that it's going to take somebody to go from 0 to 60, right? And their first semester, you're not going to want them to do stuff like this. And their second semester, you're going to want them to think of stuff like this. And your third semester, you're going to want them to start doing stuff like this. And then in the fourth semester, they're 2 years teaching. Or the fifth semester, you're going to want them to be doing stuff like this, right? So like the next thing I thought of is where do you start from? And like me, I start from finding fault with everybody else. So you take the worksheets that you're given, right?
No toxic positivity on this podcast.
No, just like the what do pearls come out of? Clams? Oysters? Yeah. I only know stuff about what I know about.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Got to be in biology. So oysters, they don't make pearls out of good stuff. They make pearls out of a piece of sand, right? The grit, the stuff that pisses them off. Pissed off oysters will give you the best stuff. So be a pissed off oyster when you look at your own worksheets, right? And go through there and think about, okay, this was the part of the assessment that the students weren't getting. So this thing that the district is making me use, I'll still use, but now I know I need to reinforce this. And that's what I got from D&D character sheets. So do you think I should just describe this stuff? Should I share my screen? Should I do both, obviously?
I don't think I can do a screen share with you.
Okay, perfect. So that works. Then I have to describe it. So most D&D character sheets are 2 or 3 pages. Dungeons and Dragons, a role-playing game. I'm assuming most people have at least heard of it. But the idea in Dungeons and Dragons is that you're your character. You have hopefully a role to play in your mind, and you're going to go out and achieve things based on some dynamics that you've created for your character. So you've got 6 abilities that determine your success at a bunch of different things. And one of the things that I really like over time is, of those 6 ability scores, it used to be that the score itself was the most important. So that on the character sheets, the score was a larger box, and then the modifier that is determined from that score was a smaller box. And it took like 15 years for D&D's character sheets to catch up to the changes in D&D's game. So it's been 15 years since you needed that number in the game at all. And it was still larger on the character sheet than the modifier. The modifier you need every 5 or 6 minutes while you're playing a game. Every time you roll a dice to determine what your character does, you need to know that modifier. You never need to know the number anymore. And so it was kind of funny where everybody that had been playing the game their whole lives, they didn't notice. They were immediately transferring the number into the modifier in their heads because we all had the chart memorized from age 12. But for new people, they'd come in and they'd be like, oh, okay, the what? I need to know the what? I need to know the what? And it took that long for somebody to click over in character sheet making. And now the number is the small box and the modifier is the big box. So you can look down the list and say, okay, I roll a D20 and I add a +2. You don't need to go, oh, I roll a D20, I have a 14 dexterity. Now I have to know that, oh, look, there's the little box. And so the idea that on this character sheet, there's all these things in the character sheet that's provided by the company that makes the game. There are all these things that are extremely valuable to you if you know what you're doing. If you're a learner and it's your first time playing, it just looks like an Excel sheet barfed up some tables. And it doesn't, let me look at it. There are abbreviations all over the place. There are things that are in bold. There are things that are in light gray that are almost impossible for me to read.
You are describing a bilingual learner's first look at a computer science class.
Right? There's boxes that are only explained by
what the hell does this mean?
By initials, yeah. And none of it is built around what you're probably going to be doing in the game most of the time. And this is the upgraded one. This is the one that I'm impressed with. Now, there are alternatives. Now, the beautiful thing about the company is when you go to their character sheets list, there's a 5th edition, which is what we're in now, character sheet zip package, which has like 10 different character sheets in it. Then there's the character sheets from the starter set, which are a little friendlier. Then there are alternative character sheets that have been made by other people and included in the official download. And one of my absolute favorites.
So while you're pulling that up, they recognize that their sheet may not be the best, and they're pulling their user sheets to incorporate?
I believe so. And it was at least created by a group. They frequently have people working and playtesting things before they're released. So they'll have they're called modules, right? So your experience levels, 5 through 8 or whatever. And there's 4 to 6 people in your group. So they'll release small books that are specific storylines for that. And they'll run those through people and then adjust them based on it. So they're incorporating a lot of learner feedback already. But it took a long time for the character sheets to get updated. But instead of just saying, like, here's the character sheet, right? This is the official character sheet. You've got to use it. Even incorporating people's changes into that character sheet, I think people would have been happy with. But to include, 8 different alternatives and optionals, I think goes beyond that into stuff that what we're talking about, right? Where you go beyond compliance, you go beyond utilizing the resources a little better, and all the way into pouring your time and your effort into making a bunch of different options for students and learners, no matter what kind of style they might come in as, quote unquote. they can pick one and submit it. And the way that this would be, translated into the online environment would be you post a lecture, you post a transcript of the lecture, you post timestamps of different topics covered in the lecture linked out to a document that explains how and why those relate to not only the assessment but to the overall course. And if the stuff sounds exhausting, it's because it is. It's a lot of work. But in the end, the feedback mechanism, if you keep reinforcing it like this, it's great.
Well, that's a key word there too, feedback, right? And hopefully it won't take a teacher 15 years to discover that their initial character sheet sucks, or it's too difficult for low-level learners, and they will adapt more quickly. I had this discussion with a lady that I actually game with online. So I dare say this out loud, but I'm a huge Fallout fan. I'm going to get lots of hate for that.
Probably.
But her and I...
I'll be sending it.
She's a scholar over in England, and she and I were discussing gamification as a process. And she says, there's not a manual for Fallout. There's press A to jump, blah, blah, blah. But there's so many other layers to that game. So how do you, as a player, get better? And it's through interaction with other players who understand more than you do. So it's not always about just the teacher. So I love that D&D recognizes their faults as the teacher and incorporates that peer feedback into it. And that's effective.
And I guess at the operational level, like, what does it look like? Why do I like some of these other character sheets better? And the ones that are designed for people to guide them through a process. One of them, for instance, they've all got, boxes, rectangles that contain rules and data and optional choices that the characters choose while they fill out and create themselves. And while the players create the characters, the characters don't create themselves. We don't want to get too far into that. Sure they do. The story writes itself.
Well, we've got too much geekiness going on already. Like, dial it down.
They kind of do. And anyway, and then the ones that I really like guide you through the process. So, for instance, it says, I want to hit something. Mm-hmm. And it has a picture of the dice you would use, and it has choices, right? I want to hit something, with my axe. I want to hit something far away, right? And what am I using? I have a crossbow. I want to hit something with a spell. What do I have? And, and how far away it is. And it has little predetermined boxes for it. Now, one of the weaknesses of the initial character sheets is they had very specific areas to put very specific information, right? So it said, range. It said, a little thing for ammunition. It said a little thing for this, a little thing for that. And so if you didn't immediately know what those abbreviations were, or what kind of weapon, or maybe the weapon you picked was from a newer book and it didn't use the same kinds of things, and so now the character sheets itself are a detriment to you even getting started. And so the newer character sheets, they just have boxes. You got a weapon, you want to draw it. You want to put a description of it or write a page number.
That makes me happy,
right? And so you're no longer limited by these predetermined areas. They give you a lot of the same boxes, right? So now we've got the picture on there. It tells you which dice to use. It has a space for you to say, oh, and then on the other side it says, hey, I've been hit by somebody, right? What happens to me? You have armor, right? Like, oh no, it's gone through my armor and hurt me. Like, well, you have hit points. And then it's like, oh no, I've lost all my hit points and I'm dying. And then what do you do when you're reduced to 0 and you have death saves and you have life saves, or life? If you roll successful on a death save, you can come back up out of 0 hit points and get back into the fight. And then it's like, I have potions, I have inventory, I have gold, I have friends, I have things wrong with me called flaws. Like, all these things are listed on the character sheet from the perspective of the player going through the experience, and not an expert using a tool. So they both have value, right? And you would expect, I guess, eventually the player to want to, level up out of that intro character sheet, right? When they say, I don't need a picture of the dice anymore. I got it. And then there's still better character sheets too.
One of the, I had a thought about how it As you start to play the same people over and over again, do you find that they tend to develop their characters in like do they have a personal formula that they tend to follow? Like maybe a melee player or maybe a ranged player or I mean, do you find that they play a certain way over and over again, or do you find that they alternate their creative bent to try to throw people off?
There's meta, yeah. There's a meta aspect to it too, where players are playing for a certain goal, right? Like somebody may have wealth acquisition as their goal in their head, and they may not even realize that their character that they thought was doing something else is actually focused on wealth acquisition. And so even if they make 10 different characters, if they still think about gathering treasure and getting items and using them, and that's still wealth acquisition, right? Whereas you may have somebody else that may step in and say, oh, I'm a monk with a vow of poverty. And like every time they give them treasure and money, like they literally just give it away to NPCs. And that may drive other characters nuts.
I can see that. So I'm trying to tie that back to if you're an online learner and you're participating in some kind of peer-to-peer interactions, and you have, inherently you have some learners that have these blind spots, so they may not cover all of the material. So you have, as a peer, you have to recognize that within the course, but also as the facilitator, right? How are you going to manage that student weakness, that student blind spot?
Yeah, right. And then I think the obvious and wrong answer is to make groups with really rigid, predetermined roles, right? Like,
I hate that idea.
I'm the secretary of the group. I'm the court jester. That one's probably a bad example. But right, like the treasurer, like what dynamic are you creating in this group and for what purpose? So when I was in my graduate degree, not making friends, I was put in a group, and on day one, when somebody suggested that, I was like, we're not doing that. And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, we're not doing roles. Like, this is a group of professionals in a graduate degree. We're all doing everything. We're all doing research. We're all doing design. We're all doing building. We're all going to decide on stuff. We're all going to make separate web pages, and I'm going to tie them together, and it's all going to look great. We're going to get an A, and there's no other answer. And 3 out of 4 people were cool with that.
But there's always that one.
Yeah, and that was
and as a facilitator, how do you handle that one? And I have a personal preference on that, but I want to hear your take before I.
Well, and that's a perfect example of a terrible use case, because I guess I have an overbearing personality at times.
No.
Yeah, she's making fun of me now.
You are strongly opinionated, and there are people who can handle that, and then there are people who feel like you're steamrolling them. So you gotta, there's that balance in that group. I'm a steamroller too in the group, because I'm like type A. I'm getting an A, whether you contribute or not. I'm getting the A. Right?
And I think there's also, when 3 out of 4 people immediately agree on something, and the fourth person doesn't have a dynamic doesn't have any reason to think that their arguments or dissatisfaction is going to be incorporated, right? Like that's part of the issue. So one of the group members never really signaled that anything was wrong, and then at the end of the project, we were asked to give each other a grade, and this grade was going to be averaged together with the other 2 group members, and then anonymously added to our semester. Two of them,
not the way to go.
2 of them gave me a 95, and one of them gave me a 50.
Yeah.
Right? And we got an A on our project. It was great, according to me. And the team. and I thought we turned out a good product, but there was something about the dynamic in the group that they were completely dissatisfied with. And then I had to go back with that group and think, like, one of these people secretly hates me.
Really hates me. Yeah.
Yeah, because they were the only one. I was the only one I think that somebody had done that to. And so
I've had that experience many times.
Kind of group dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Hate it.
I do too.
I loved the product. I loved the group. I loved the group dynamic right up until that moment. Mm-hmm. I thought we were all working together well. And so it doesn't mean that I was, stabbed in the back at the end of a project. It means there was no dynamic for group feedback built into it from the beginning to know that somebody was that dissatisfied. Or, my output, my behavior, something changed during the from planning to implementation. But for, the other two people to give me 95s and one of them to give me an F.
It's pretty obvious who had the grudge.
And it was anonymous, so it just made me frustrated at all three of them.
I don't mind the peer feedback piece, but I don't think that should be part of the assessment grade. And for that reason exactly, because you have personal dynamics, right? Yeah. I look at those as opportunities and
no recourse for feedback from me either.
Nothing. And they're like, what? I don't even know who said it. I think those kind of things need to be built into the project as well. The team aspect of it, the communication piece of it, because that's very much part of reality. You are going to have that one person on your team who just hates you and doesn't want to do anything with you. And you're like, what? Why? And so you still have to deliver this product at the end of the day in industry. So you have to have that teamwork dynamic. You don't have to like each other, but you have to respect each other. You have to do your job. So I usually build that into the rubric as a communication piece. And it's not, again, it's tied to the grade, but the grade is not dependent on people liking you. It's more of, did the person do this? Did the person do this? And it's always very measurable. It's never subjective because you don't want to leave any room for, because they're gonna go the negative way if they have that ability. So I have had evaluations in my actual courses where I despise the professor and I could not wait to blast him on that evaluation. But I got to the evaluation and did he do this? Well, damn it, yes. Did he do this? Yes. Damn it. He did it really well. Damn it. So I'm going down the checklist, and as much as I hated that guy, he still hit everything he was supposed to hit. And at the end, I had to begrudgingly admit that, okay, fine, I learned something from him, even though I didn't like him as a person, right?
And that's why you don't ask people about their satisfaction in a learning unit.
That's a podcast.
I couldn't even get the sentence out without getting exhausted because I've talked about it so much in my professional life, right? Don't ask people how happy they are after learning about bones. Mm-hmm. They're not fucking happy. They might be informed about bones, but they're not going to be happy about it.
That's the other trend I'm seeing right now that I also have a problem with. Student satisfaction, it helps, but at the end of the day, and that's a perfect metaphor for it, right? I don't want to learn about bones, but it's part of my job. So I really need to know it. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to like it, but I'm going to do it. And I think that there are some places that student satisfaction really shouldn't matter. But
right, here's a perfect example. You get told gamification's cool. You're like, cool. Mm-hmm. I'm going to put in, Jeopardy. I'm going to do PowerPoint Jeopardy in my classroom, which I think is great fun. I loved it as a student. But if you do it at the wrong point in the learning and they don't have enough of the learning done to be able to participate in the game, it's not reinforcing anything. It's just making them feel out of place. And so now the only people who are competing are the two yahoos,
smart kids
that read the whole textbook or the person that was held back. That was one of my favorite experiences in Algebra 2 was being the student that secretly failed it because he had pneumonia and broke his leg in one semester. And so I had to take all of Algebra 2 over again and was able to just ace everything and no one knew why. It was great. So yeah, unless you're one of those kids, you're not able to participate in a game in a way that makes it fun. So that's why I've always tried to focus on what are you actually assessing, right? If you come out of it and you're like, they didn't like it. They didn't like the game. Are you sure? Where was the game? When did you do the game? What kind of game did you do? And just like we talked about earlier, where you've got the teams competing for one fund for an entrepreneurial game experience, makes perfect sense. You wouldn't do that with second graders and reading, right? Like only one of you gets to take a book home. Whoever reads the best gets the book. The rest of y'all can look through the window as they read, right? Like, no, you're not going to do that there. It's a terrible example.
That's actually a great time to contact an instructional designer, because before you, and I've seen it so many times in K through 12 where they will initiate a game that it's not inclusive of everyone. It does only, you're only getting the top 10% participation because everybody else still doesn't understand. I think that is the perfect time to, if your game fails so bad, it's not because these kids are stupid. No, it's because you did not assess where they were before you went there. And if you're using that as a piece of formative feedback, that should be a red flag for you as a teacher. Oh, crap. Like, these kids they're not engaging. I need to go back and go over this material again, at least with the bottom 90%, and give these extra 10% some kind of supplemental, something else to do. And that ties back to our needs assessment, which we've talked about, but unfortunately went straight in the can. So we'll have to talk about it again sometime.
Yeah, we will. Once we get some emotional distance from it, we'll do it again. And before we move on too far about that, I want to talk about a perfect, I'm going to say hilarious example of a game not being inclusive. The game that I play is a miniatures game with either fantasy figures or figures in the future, sci-fi figures. And one of the rules in one of these spells used to say something along the lines of, pick up the casting model with your right hand and put your left hand on the battlefield somewhere. And
you don't have a right hand.
So one of the painters I follow on Twitter is one-handed painting. I wish I could remember his actual Twitter name, but it's something along those. And so he made a video where he tried to cast this spell and was like, what the fuck, guys? Wow. I guess it fails. I guess I can't cast the spell. And so the new edition doesn't have shit like that in it.
Nice.
And so stuff like that, yeah. And you might not even, you can't immediately feel like the villain if this happens to you in the classroom. You're not a villain. It's what you do next.
Exactly. That's so true.
Right? Everybody learns this the first time. Somewhere.
So true. Yeah.
A lot of us, I think, learned it in the classroom or in the teaching environment.
Mm-hmm.
And
usually
then what
at
do
the
you do?
expense of some child.
It is, thankfully in America, it's always at the expense of the children.
Well, I had a couple experiences like that myself. We had kids that had to, we were making cards for people in old folks' homes. And one of my students made a card and he said, "Oh, I know you're suffering from cancer. I did too. And I hope everything feels better." I was like, "You can't write that." And he says, "Yes, I can." I was like, "No, you didn't have cancer." And the kid next to him was like, "Yeah, you did." I was like, oh, I am an awful human being. But those are moments that you can admit this is my humanity as a teacher. So I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know, and I'm an idiot." So, those are teachable moments for us as well. So I don't mind having my blind spots.
Yeah. Well, and I lost any I don't know, frustration about that early on in life. At 27, my first wife died of leukemia. And so when you're like 28, 29, and you say something like, "Oh yeah, my first wife, my previous wife, my previous marriage," people just assume it didn't, work
Divorce.
out, right? Like she just ran on. And so if you're like me and you're into dark humor, you just start incorporating it, right? And you're like, and you hear about somebody and you're like, "Oh yeah, my first wife," and like, "Oh, don't worry, she had the decency to die. Like, she didn't run off on me."
And that goes back to group work. That flavor doesn't work with everybody in the group.
Yeah, 295s and 150. That about speaks to it. No, and that way, it takes an uncomfortable situation and makes it worse in like different ways.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends
Yeah.
on the sense of humor. But
Well, and it's like if you've got an entrance joke like that or an entrance activity for your students to do that will set the tone for the semester, I don't suggest that. But if you have something where you come into it, you know, and if you've got, you know, for instance, a criminal justice class where you're going to be showing people autopsies, I think it's appropriate to show them something on day one, right? Like you're going to bring people into this world and you're going to show them what's going on. You got to bring them into it. To tie my insane sense of humor back into something relevant. Let me look at my notes one more time.
I was about to say, how do we put a bow on this?
I actually did hit every topic I had in my notes without really going back to them, except for my Bruce Lee quote. I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times. Mm-hmm. And to think about that from, you know, the learning perspective, if you try to introduce all of the bones in 45 minutes and expect the students to follow along on their own learning journey from that without a really good plan for how they're going to divide it up, how they're going to refer back to the lecture, where are the placeholders for learning that you created? Do they have a guided worksheet that they can use to not only build their own knowledge, but refer back to later on as a study guide for the assessment? And then we can talk about all the digital ways to create these assets too, I guess, in a follow-up show.
Sure. Yeah, I'm totally down with that because to this day, well, I say that, and now I'm thinking about it, I don't think I can do it anymore, but I had a history teacher at one point in high school that made us play Four Corners to memorize all of the presidents in order.
What's
and
Four
they were
Corners?
You had to imagine them. You had to visualize the president sitting in the corner, but instead of visualizing the face, there was some kind of symbolism that went with that particular president. So George Washington was you had a cherry tree over there, and then you had I don't even remember anymore, but it stuck with me for years until I stopped using it. So I love that. Again, that works for some students. That doesn't work for others, and I'm of this opinion at this point in my life that you can't teach it one way.
Mm-hmm.
There's just too many students that are falling through the cracks because of your personal arrogance as a teacher, and I can say that because I had it and right. I felt it. So I'm not just picking on teachers. Mm-hmm. I was a teacher for many years, and I saw my students dropping, and that just was not acceptable to me. So at this point, we have to find new and innovative ways, and gamification that includes everyone. It's a little bit of a unicorn, but it is doable. It's doable if you take the student satisfaction piece out of it.
I think so too. And an interesting gamification course that one of our colleagues helped put together for one of the departments on campus was to use essentially the idea of an escape room, but not either you get out or don't, but how far out of the room you get, so to speak, is the grade you achieve. So it really did let the students kind of say, French poetry is cool and all, but I'm not going to do that, right? I'm not going to do all that it takes to get an A. And it was phrased a certain way where it was really like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, you do these things and you get a D. Then you do these things, you get a C. You do these things, you're one of the people that gets a B. And if you're one of the people that does all of these things within this timeline and reinforces it this way, then you're one of the people that gets all of the different badges that equal an A. And so in that one, they were able to use, badges and coins and that kind of thing, where you were gathering together of different colors. And then, once you got a certain number of each, you were able to achieve a grade at the end of the semester. I think that kind of idea took the pressure out of it, where instead of it being like, oh man, I didn't get 97% kill rate on this game, and now I don't get to get an A. There was no, unless you were deliberately missing the checkpoint dates to not get an A, right? If you just wanted to do it without worrying about the checkpoint dates, then you were getting a B. You're fine. But if you wanted to do the checkpoint dates, if you wanted to be reinforced correctly, if you wanted to follow the schedule, then you could get an A. And I think
go ahead.
It works. Like gamification like that is great. And that was a game, so to speak, included in a class, but I don't think the students thought of it as a game. It was the whole semester.
That, and when you said escape room, my first reaction to those words is like, that just it sounds like torture working with other people. But my oldest daughter is obsessed with these things, so she drags me into one, and I just come in kicking and screaming like, oh, I'm just gonna do this for her. And secretly, although I'll never admit it, I had fun.
Excellent.
So those students that may give you that initial just try it out. They might discover something new.
I think I mentioned this project previously too, because it was the one that she brought it to me and she went over it, and I was like, I don't get it. I don't see what you're talking about. I don't see how this is going to work. I don't see how you're going to do this. And it wasn't that I thought it was a bad idea. It was literally like, you know what I mean? Describing colors to a blind person. Like, yeah. I don't care if it's red or blue. Like, it has no impact on my understanding of what needs to be done. It just didn't make any sense to me. And so I had to step back as a leader and say, like, yeah, do this. This sounds great for you to do. I don't get it. Come to me with technical questions and help, and I can help you figure out how to implement these different ideas, but I am not going to stand in your way or even pretend like I need to be in these meetings to do anything. Like, I'm just going to nod along. Like, no, you're in charge of this. You take this.
So that's the kind of activity I would have, what I would call an exit ramp. For kids who adamantly did not want to participate in something like that, I always had an alternative activity that still taught them the same thing. It was still project-based because that's just how I roll. And
that was the CPAP. To be just kind of do whatever you want, to be on your own, to not worry about the schedule or the groups or the rooms. Yeah. You could take the class and get a C. But the way that they were doing it, it was part of a really active dynamic. And I think a paper, not a grant, maybe actually, no, it was part of a grant too. So you were going to be in that class and you were going to kind of participate in that, or you could basically take a different class. But I think, if it wasn't a semester long project, if it was something where you're like, okay, today, guys, we're going to do this competition I've designed to reinforce these things. And then, like you said, if the exit ramp is, you don't really want to feel like that. You don't want to talk today. Here's the guided lesson activity I have to do instead.
That's it.
Yeah, that works great. Just like if the students are like, I have 5 15-page papers to do. Could one of you guys let us do a video presentation? Right? Can we do a poster? Like, I think these things that get universal in certain disciplines, like for instance, poster presentations, everybody understands it in the sciences. We don't have a lot of poster presentations in the non-arts, right? Like, people aren't doing poster presentations at I don't want to say they're not, but some schools do. Poster presentations for literature, poster presentations for poetry, and poster presentations for history does them. I've seen those. But I know
where they do them. Elementary and middle school.
Yeah, they shouldn't be doing them there. That's weird.
No, it's phenomenal. My daughter did one in middle school where they had a literary fair. They were all poster presentations. They had to dress like their character. And as you went from poster to poster, they had to tell you about the book they had read.
Oh, okay. So they weren't just done by
Why can't we do that at the higher levels?
Right. I was immediately thinking that they were just projects done by parents. But that sounds like the kid actually has to be involved.
Some of them, yes, definitely had some parental guidance, but no.
And I was that parent for a little while. My son is autistic. He's 14 now. And before he was fully medicated on the medication now that helps him function in the reality that school forces on him, it was a lot. And so he would come home just like drained and exhausted, and they'd be like, go make this diorama about Mark Twain or whatever. And he was just like, no, it was not going to happen. So yeah, I had to do a lot of it with him beyond the level that I think you would expect up until. And now in the 8th grade, he brings these projects home, and I'm like, I give him advice. I'm like, I think you should maybe like rewrite that. Like that looks pretty messy.
Just for the record, we know.
Oh, I know.
It's fairly obvious.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, this is
but
what he
if
did
the
to me.
student can answer the questions, then we're happy with that.
You're gonna love what he did to me. He pulled out the rubric.
Oh.
And he was like, "We are not being judged for neatness."
Oh, nice. That's a bit sloppy, Dad.
And just like the gamification escape room class, I had to say, you know what? Apparently you've got this. It happened the other day too when I was dropping him off. I was trying to quiz him for his science test. And obviously, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And so he's talking about like secondary succession and plants turning an environment from smaller plants into bigger plants or whatever. And I understand it, but he knew it better. And so I was like trying to figure out some way to quiz him, like, because you're trying to help. And at one point he just looked at me and he was like, I got it. And I was like, you know what? Evidently you understand this better than I do. You go take your test. And he got like a 96.
There's the goal. The
As a
teach
parent,
the teacher moment. That's it.
It was
That's
beautiful.
The goal.
Yeah, that combined with him whipping the rubric out on me and just being like.
Thanks so much for listening to our podcast. For more instructional design tips, tricks, and resources, check out our website at disposabledesignpodcast.com. You can also find us on Twitter at Thomas_Sosby and at Ms. Zintech.